the idea of this session is actually to give you a space to share your concerns and your main challenges at the regulatory level, regardless of the region where you are. We will try always to have a short presentation at the beginning from experts to share their insights in some of the regulatory kind of hot topics that are out there. Today, we have with us Dea and Adriana from FTI, and I'm going to let them to introduce a little bit more. I'm going to let them to introduce themselves a little bit more, but just for you to know, they're going to talk about the MiCA regulation, which you might have heard just passed here in Europe, and it's a really complex regulation. So we thought it was a good idea for them to give us a debrief of the most important topics that you should consider right now. So Dea, I will hand over to you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks and hi everybody. So my name is Dea Markova. I'm here with my colleague Adriana. We're both from FTI Consulting, which is we're an agency based in Brussels, and we do advocacy work for crypto companies and other types of companies. But Adriana in particularly have been really focused on our crypto clients, and we've been working with the IOTA team for a while now to make sure that as Europe goes through the process of not only figuring out its own regulatory framework around most things crypto, but also being probably the most sophisticated regulator who does this at the scale at which they've done it. So therefore setting up some sort of global template. You make sure that these rules are kind of, future, as we'd say, future-proof, fit for purpose, to the extent that we can push that envelope in Brussels. What I'll do, I'll let Adri say hi, and then what I'll do is we have a bunch of quite content-heavy slides that I'm going to go through quickly, just to give you a sense of what this framework is. Then we'll have some time for questions, and then I think it's okay for us maybe to share the slides with you, because I don't want you guys to be reading through everything that we have written down as I'm speaking.
You can send the slides to me. It sounds great. You can send the slides to me, and I will send it to everyone on Discord. So even those that couldn't attend can have the live. And I forgot to mention, this call is being recorded, and I'm going to also share it with you for those that couldn't attend. Just one small thing: your voice is going in and out sometimes, so I don't know if maybe you have a better connection while Adriana introduces herself.
I just take the chance to introduce myself now then. Hello everyone, I'm Adriana. I'm the senior consultant in the financial services team, and as Dea told you, I'm mainly invested in the crypto activity from the financial services perspective. So very happy to be here and also listen to your insights, and So looking forward to start the discussion with you all.
Okay. And guys, I'm sorry for my connection. If it gets bad, just shout, and then maybe Adri can take over, or we hope for better Wi-Fi. But that's the extent of my capabilities at the moment.
No worries. Like, I even have doubts if it's you or me, but let's move ahead. And if someone cannot hear us, just raise your hand or unmute yourself and let us know.
Okay. Shall I maybe share a screen now? Yeah?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, I'll do that. Right. Okay. So you guys can see okay?
Yeah, it's
perfect.
All right. So we have a bunch of unexciting content-heavy slides which can hopefully serve as a reference point going forward. What Europe did over the past 2 years, and then, if I'm sorry if I'm saying things that some of you may know, but the pace of legislation is such that normally at the European level we get something proposed, and it takes us at least a year to negotiate it, and then probably 2 years from then to what we call bring it into force. So therefore, for it to become applicable law, and then you have all sorts of teething problems with that, how that law becomes the lay of the land, and the regulators learn to properly apply it. That's in normal times. The fact that crypto is a new industry that regulators are sort of trying to refit existing regulatory frameworks, and it doesn't always work that way, makes things a bit more complicated, and so much so that it took us not 1 but 2 years to negotiate what's called MiCA. It stands for Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation. But on the plus side, when it becomes so it's almost over. The negotiations are nearly done at the moment. There are no big changes expected anymore, and then you can count a year and a half from more or less January or year for the rules to start applying. There's slightly more complicated schedule, but pretty much that's the schedule. And then that means that if you're a business that needs a license, you need to get that license, but then your license will be applicable anywhere in the EU. So you get the stick of the rules, and then the fines if you don't follow them, but then the carrot of having single market access and having regulatory predictability and passporting in across the EU. So this kind of like more or less what I said. It's, you hear this often that regulators are trying to kind of technology regulatory framework, but their point of view, we've kind of very to put yourself supervisors and the regulators before you start judging them. But from their point of view, some of the risks, the new technology doesn't change the risks. And therefore, there are some patterns in risk management, stability, consumer protection, that let's say it applies to equity trading, then it might also apply to the token trading. Or if it applies to using e-money to pay each other, then it would also apply to using stablecoins to pay each other. And that's kind of the logic of the law. And as I was saying, this comes with legal certainty, uniform rules. It replaces, so at the moment, it's not that crypto is not regulated in Europe. That would be a mistake to say. There are anti-money laundering rules that apply to trading, or rather to all sorts of services provided around crypto. In every member state, and in some member states there are even more sophisticated regimes, like for example Germany is an example, that if you provide services you need to follow. So MiCA will replace, MiCA and the AML regime will replace all of that, and have as much as possible a harmonized framework. These are the more or less the chapters. So if you fall in scope, if the activity that you do falls in scope, you need a license. You need to be what's called prudentially stable. So you need to hold certain capital in certain ways in order to not go under and take client assets with you. You need to follow certain transparency disclosure requirements. Steward consumer protection if you're going to do promotion, and then there are rules around safe operations, sustainable governance, prevention of market abuse. So that means anti-insider trading. and some rules around acquisitions as well. I guess the most important, one of the kind of the two most important things to take away is to think of who falls in scope. And particularly since, we're having this conversation within the IOTA community, question of where does decentralized fit into the one layer fit. So MiCA is there in order to put rules around anybody who's providing service to anyone else in professional capacity. Then there was a lot of negotiations around what anybody needs. Does it have to be a company? Does it have to be an individual? A company, etc. We ended up in saying that it doesn't matter whether you are a legal person or not, or whether or legal entity. If someone somehow paying you,
it's like really difficult to hear what you're saying because coming in and out. Just for me, everyone has the same issue.
That's just for you. I can hear her.
It's just for me?
Yes.
Okay, so then it's the internet then. Okay, it doesn't matter.
I'm sorry for making you feel better. Still see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So where was I? So then wait, hang on. Don't think we're yeah, so providing a service is somebody somehow paying you for this. You are in scope of MiCA. It's a little bit more complicated than that's more complicated in sound. Finding a useful guidance. And then the two very big buckets are you providing a service? So custody, operating of a trust platform, exchange of funds, exchange crypto exchange, crypto exchange, placing of crypto assets. So you're doing an initial offering, advice, or portfolio management. And then the other big bucket is are you issuing and by what they mean by crypto assets is here. So MiCA did took on the commission. They spent a bit of time creating the taxonomy of what a crypto asset means, meaning that if you put things in different buckets, you can, from a regulatory perspective, treat them differently. And the big drama, basically, was what we do with the tokens that purport to be stable and equals particularly to a currency or a basket of currencies or something else that may or may not become a way for us to pay each other in the future. So this is the thing that regulators are mostly afraid of. It was very much spooked by the first version of, or the first kind of version of Libra. And that's why you have these categories. They're called e-money tokens and asset reference tokens, meaning it's a stable coin which is equal to a currency. That's an e-money token, or it's a stable coin which is equal to whatever mixture of something else. That's an asset reference token. And the rules around these two things are quite marginally higher than what at the moment the issuers of these types of tokens would have to follow. One thing is that, for example, for an e-money token, you have to have an e-money license, which is another already existing regulatory framework. And MiCA is basically saying, well, hang on, you look like a e-money transfer platform. And therefore you should be regulated that way. And you cannot be, you have to have an entity in order to have that license secured. So you can't issue these type of tokens without having an entity and without having this kind of license. And so that leaves the fluctuating tokens, which they call utility tokens, which is basically everything else. But everything else, up to a point. So everything that else that is fungible. So NFTs are for the most part out of MiCA. There's some complexities, I can go into them. But so are tokens that are mined as or rather received as a reward for mining or maintaining the protocol. So Ethereum, Bitcoin, these anything that you receive as a reward for maintaining whatever kind of consensus mechanism, that is out of scope of MiCA because they're self-perpetuating systems. And you can't really place liability on any one particular entity within that system. That's the logic. The other thing that is out is security tokens, because the logic is a security token is just a security, which is or equity or debt, which is issued on another technology, but it doesn't fundamentally change what it is. And therefore, if you're chopping up, let's say taking Tesla shares and offering fragments of that, you're still offering Tesla shares, and you need to get your MiFID license to do that. And that's a rule that some of the big exchanges got themselves into trouble by following last year. And then decentralized finance has been like one of the big hot potatoes. One of the reasons was because DeFi was much smaller in terms of assets locked into it. Was much smaller when the regulation was drafted and proposed, and it exploded over the negotiation period. But the other big reason is because the European Commission and a good amount of policymakers in Europe do understand that the DeFi is not like centralized finance, and therefore you can't just copy paste the rules from the one to the other. There will be some gray areas on what is considered decentralized finance, and we often talk about how decentralized is decentralized enough. The logic being an entity is clearly in control of the governance or operations of a project or a protocol. That entity will be liable for whatever happens with that project or protocol. And then so there are a lot of really specific rules in these slides. One of the things we spoke with the IOTA team to discuss is that if you are a utility token issuer, it is a relatively low degree of requirement on it. You basically have to have a white paper with these requirements that you can see on the screen, and you have to what's called notify the white paper to your local authority, means submit it and wait for an approval. And unless you do that, your token will not be able to be listed on the European exchanges. So the exchanges, I think it's worth recognizing a lot of the ways for the regulator to kind of enforce these rules is to focus on the centralized platforms in the exchanges, because obviously those are the points that they can control. So that also goes for the listing of utility tokens. So
sorry, can I jump in there to make a question because it's related to that? Sorry, here is Mariana again. My internet just died, so I'm connecting from OSA, so we don't use so much Wi-Fi. Okay. Can you just please tell the community a little bit about actually the timeline, like when it's going to be enforced and when they actually need to start working on the white papers, because I think that this is an interesting part for them.
Yeah. So I think what's important is that, and this was one of political fight that didn't go the way we wanted it to go. I'm afraid to say. So a white paper requirement will fall on everything that is traded the moment MiCA comes into force, which means that even if you have a history of trading a token, that token will need to be it would need its white paper notified in order to continue trading on European exchanges. Otherwise, it will have to get delisted. And what you see on the screen here is the somewhat complicated timeline of MiCA. But long story short, you have, I'd say conservatively speaking, 18 months from February next year to develop these white papers, and then start notifying them to local regulators. Okay. I'm skipping over a bunch of details, but that's the kind of, because we have been talking a lot. Then the only thing I wanted to highlight more is just a few other things that are not MiCA, that are also regulatory requirements. But before I go into that, are there any questions?
Well, if they don't have questions, then maybe I'm gonna make some teaser questions here that I know that are like also key point, and it's specifically the requirements of the white papers, and especially the one that concerns maybe to the environmental impact of the protocols as well, because those will be followed by some standards that are also not like put in place right now. So maybe if you can refer to the specifics of the white paper and those requirements, it will be great.
See if I can get that. Adri, if you have that level of detail on top of your mind, please jump in.
Yes. Let me also check. Here I have them. In the slide, there is part of the information, the minimum information that the white paper.
So I think this is the one that I have on right now, right? So you need detailed description of the issuer, issuer's project, characteristics of the offer to the public, rights and obligations attached to each token, information underlying technology, information related to the risks, a summary, the environmental impact. So there is something. So each token will have to come with, let's say, an environmental badge. And what that actually means is not, it's something that you can already read in the law. It is something that is, so in the European policymaking process, you have the top line law, which we call which we call level 1. And then there's usually a lot of technical details, which the more technical agencies of the EU are left to develop. And that's why a regulation like this one has an 18 months usually or so implementation window, because the industry needs to get ready, but also some of these technical rules, technical standards they call, need to be developed. So the environmental thing in particular sits with an agency called ESMA, which is to yet figure out what are the parameters based on which these environmental scores are to be calculated, and that's as much as we know, right? So we can tell you sort of from the kitchen that we've had some background conversations, and then there are big questions like do you, for example, just make a distinction between consent mechanisms that are energy, the high energy consumption or proof of work, and low energy consumption like proof of stake, and all the others that are basically not proof of work, or do you go further than that? How do you make a distinction even within a proof of work environment, proof of work construct? How do you make the distinction for mining that's used, let's say, green or renewable energy versus mining might be a lot of energy, but might be high pollution versus low pollution for the same amount of energy needed. These are the authorities are actually quite open to thinking on these questions to be shared with them, because there isn't sort of a framework that's already being drafted, or that's almost like ready, I would say, and then the kind of complicated questions that are not figured out, right? So for example, do we mine green bitcoins and we put a tag, and do we apply those rules only for tokens going forward, or do we apply the rules for tokens going backwards? These are kind of complicated questions that over 2023, beginning of 24, this regulatory agency will have to figure out, and there is a time and place for industry input into that thinking.
Thank you there. Does anyone has like questions? I have a couple more, so if but I would like to give the option, like the ideas that you guys actually use this time to just like make the questions you might have about MiCA. Nope. Then I guess I'm gonna follow up with one question that like in my interest to many of our community members, and it's like the NFT part, which is quite complex because they were left out, but collections actually are in. So can you just like talk a little bit more about like what does that mean exactly?
Yeah. So there was NFTs, whether you issue them or whether you offer them for trading or any other services around them, are out of scope of MiCA. That's the top level principle. Now, what authorities were concerned though is it possible for someone to use the NFT standard, but actually de facto offer trading of fungible assets? So can you issue NFTs that are where the underlying asset is actually the same? So that's the one, and then the other one is how can you create a bit of consumer protection and transparency when you have big NFT collections, because the price of one NFT, the price of the NFTs within a collection are relative to each other. So for example, if you have a big scarcity of one item or several items in the collection, those are more expensive. If you have a lot of similar items within the collection, then those are less expensive. And because this kind of scarcity is really difficult to discern sometimes, and that can lead to consumer confusion or even fraud, they said that this same white paper requirement will apply to big collections. And then what big collection means, like how big is big enough, this is the kind of technical detail then these regulatory agencies that I mentioned, particularly the capital markets one called ESMA, will have to figure out in the next sort of in the new year. But do have in mind that there's this collection rule that was negotiated 25th hour into the. So we were trying very hard to make sure that NFT platforms are out of scope, and they are. We were trying to make sure that not any one NFT issuer is in scope, and they're not in scope. The collection requirement was the concession that got into the final rules.
If I also can add something on what they said. So ESMA is mandated by MiCA to set up the criteria for the qualification of crypto assets as financial instruments, and those criteria will also serve to classify crypto assets that cannot. Those guidelines are also important because this will mean that from this ESMA criteria, some NFTs could not qualify. Some NFT, if the NFT, if the crypto asset qualifies of NFTs, they can also qualify as and can also qualify as a financial instrument. They might not fall under MiCA scope, but under other regulatory requirements. So this is definitely something to keep in mind. I don't know if I made myself understood. It's not it's maybe a bit technical, but I guess important to bear in mind.
That's a great point, Adriana, and maybe it was already a little bit touched, but can we just maybe, because you are talking about taxonomy, for what I heard, it is possible to just for you to provide a taxonomy of what the three kind of tokens that are going to be included and what happened right now with the definition of those, especially in the case of stable coins. That I think that was mentioned at the beginning, but I think that that's one of the key points.
It's yes. Maybe we will share with you these slides. We have this information in the slides. But in any case, if there is any doubt or something, you can come back to me and India, and we will for sure.
Yeah, I've put it up, but basically, if the price of the token is fixed towards something, then watch out. That's the most important thing. If it's fixed against a currency, whether it's the euro or not, then watch out extra hard. If it's fixed against a mix of currencies or anything else, then the requirements are still not to be underestimated. And then everything else falls within that white paper requirement if you're in school.
Maybe one point there to add that might be interesting is just and maybe that correct me if I'm wrong, but those currencies that are going to be attached to something that is not euro or currencies inside of the European Union were left out, right?
Say that? No. So okay. What's really important is to remember what policymakers are worried about. They're worried about how the way we pay each other changes and it gets kind of out of control for what the European Central Bank is supposed to do and supposed to protect us from. So what they did is they said, well, if you have a stable coin, which is okay, if you have a stable coin which is equal 1-to-1 with a non-euro, with a currency that's not the euro, then and that stable coin is used for payments, and there is another level of detail of what constitutes payments, but that particularly what this means for settlement. Then there are limits to how much you can use that stable coin. So that's what's very much on the radars of USDT, USDC, these kind of guys. Then similarly, if you have a stable coin which is equal to a mix of and you use that same token for payments, again, similar disclaimer on what payments means, exactly the same disclaimer, then there are restrictions. So the paying each other with something that is not equal to the euro worries policymakers, and therefore there are restrictions on that. That would be kind of my top line sort of takeaway from the rules.
I have a question. Here it says out of scope, MiCA is not applicable to non-fungible tokens, and as example, Bitcoin is taken. But as I understood, Bitcoin is a fungible token, isn't it?
I think it's probably a little bit the formatting of our slide. So we didn't mean that Bitcoin is not fungible. We meant that Bitcoin is another token to which MiCA is not applicable. So NFT are one category of tokens to which MiCA is not applicable. Tokens that are earned as a result of maintaining a consensus mechanism are another category which are exempt, including Bitcoin.
Okay, thanks.
Does that make more sense now?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me then touch on beyond MiCA world very quickly. So there are maybe two really important frameworks negotiated at the same time. As one, MiCA is sort of the big licensing regime, the bit where like things that were not regulated will become regulated before and so on. The other big one is anti-money laundering, and they're connected because before MiCA you weren't regulated, post MiCA you are. But you're not only regulated by the rules that are in MiCA, you're also regulated by the rules that are in what's called the anti-money laundering directives and regulations of the European Union. So that's really important to pay attention to. That's where we had the big debate about what about unhosted wallets, or self-custody wallets, and the transfer of funds between the one and the other. So I won't go into the details, but I just want to flag that that's there as a requirement. We, in our Brussels language, we say MiCA 2.0. That means that every European regulation gets reviewed in about 5 years' time. And there are a lot of policymakers that are very aware that this is a new industry and that we're going to learn a lot in applying new laws, but also the industry itself is really changing quite quickly. So the new MiCA might look very different from the MiCA that you see. For example, staking and lending is not included, and it probably will be in 5 years' time. Level 2 is what I said, that there's like a whole host of technical details that were still emerging. But then there is stuff like tax and looking to unify the European Union taxes crypto gains or crypto, what they consider a crypto taxable event in the first place. There is likely to be an NFT framework in its own right. That is an embryo stage at the moment, but it is already a conversation. Similar for DeFi, there will be a separate, first it will be a report, an assessment, then it may become some form of legislation that is specific to decentralized finance, that will probably cover unhosted wallets in some shape or form. And then finally, the sustainability conversation is broader than the application of crypto to financial services, because this whole MiCA thing, that's all financial services, or financial services-esque, but they are they're kind of broader environmental frameworks that look into the sustainability of different consensus mechanisms, and we need to pay attention to those. Because that would have an impact on how we use blockchains in FS, but outside of financial services as well.
Maybe on that environmental part, like just to mention something, and is that like if the requirement for like the white papers is like 18 months, actually the standard should be done 18 months after the implementation of MiCA, which means the standards will come probably after some of the white papers have been written, and the white papers will need to be like, we will need to review them so they actually match the environmental standards that probably will come later.
I mean, that's kind of quite normal for how European legislation works, right? First you get top line law, then you wait for the technical standards, and then you scramble to make the technical standards make sense. So there probably isn't too much sense in writing the environmental assessment part of the white papers before you know what the technical rules around that environmental assessment are. But if you do have kind of an idea of what an environmental assessment could look like, then it's well worth trying to. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm gonna put like the IOTA team on the line here, but it's good to communicate to the IOTA team these ideas, because we were trying to kind of create a communication channel between them and those agencies, and those agencies are very appreciative of concrete ideas about this topic.
Thank you, Dea. Is like if that was an invitation, I will say like just go ahead. I think that is important, and I think that like one of the reasons that we're organizing this and that I will actually would like to hear more like the voices of the community is because it is important to share what you think with the policymakers, guys, because like they need to get an overview of what is actually happening in the industry, so they know for whom they are regulating and they understand a little bit better what is the context of those that are actually developing with the technology. With that said, and we have like 15 more minutes, I would like to just like hear if like someone else have more questions, like with any kind of like topics that we have discussed, the taxonomy, what is in, what is out, the white paper, the environmental standards, like anything that you have seen in the slides. Okay, then I think Osa has one question.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. Very insightful. I would actually like to ask you if you can think of any opportunities that is coming with this regulation, because I know that we mostly see MiCA as regulatory challenges and a lot of new regulations. But do you somehow see how this can benefit, how this harmonization can benefit, how we can take advantage of this?
Yeah, well, let's take it from where we left off. So the environmental thing. This, I guess, more my personal opinion than an FTI view, but this environmental badge will be a regulatory requirement. So you can build a product around it. We've seen this in the traditional asset management space a lot. There's a lot of sort of market opportunity created for these kind of environmental data, environmental assessments, dashboards, you name it. So the regulatory requirement actually creates a market, and someone will pay for these kind of assessments because they'll have to have them. So that's one example. Then from more of so this regulation is intended to capture predominantly the centralized, it is only the centralized, predominantly the centralized provision of services. So if you're a crypto asset service provider, so an exchange, a trading venue at the moment, you actually have to go through this quite painful member state by member state registration with for the purposes of AML. MiCA gets rid of that. MiCA gives you one license. Sure, it takes some time to secure it. Once you secure it, you're done. You're legal across the EU. It also means that if you follow the rules and somebody else is, say, providing the services without following those rules, without putting in the time to make sure that client assets are properly safeguarded, or fees, for example, on platforms are clear, then the regulator now has the rights to penalize these kind of behaviors, which we don't necessarily want in our community, and those who kind of do their homework can get ahead. Far be it from me to argue that the regulator gets everything right with every rule, but at the end of the day, we don't want centralized or decentralized crypto finance to be a channel for terrorism financing. We don't want consumer scams or mis-selling to be the rule of the land, and MiCA does take care of that. So I wouldn't say that it's all negative.
Yeah, I will say that the regulator, although those requirements might seem as sometimes overburdening issuers and CASPs, the intention of the regulator is to bring some sort of a consumer protection and indeed with the harmonization to ensure that to access the single market, it's and ensuring predictability for investors. Therefore, making the EU a more attractive jurisdiction.
Well, thank you very, very much, then Ariana. I'm gonna give the last chance for the community to give some questions. Nope. Okay. Then for those that didn't get motivated to make questions here, you can always make it in Discord. We are gonna share the record of this call for you in case that you want to review it, and also for those that didn't attend, as well as the slides as soon as we have them on the regulatory affairs channel. And to the FTI team, thank you very, very much for taking the time to explain MiCA so easy and so well. You make it super clear. And I guess it's not an easy homework. So thank you very much for giving us your time for the community.
Anytime. Thanks for having us.
And
thank you.
Thank you, guys. And then for the others that are still on the call, we will have another call for a different topic in December. Once we have one of the experts confirmed and the topic, I will let you know about this on Discord. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.